So we're going to talk about some head coach hot seats. There are certain ones I'm going to put more time into than others. If we start in the Eastern Conference, I think the most interesting one has to be Brett Brown, for reasons that have been stated by pretty much everyone. I mean, as I say every time I talk about the Sixers, I don't believe in trading Ben or Joel. I think you got to have a lot of things happen over many, many years before you even suggest that sort of thing. And Brett Brown could be the thing, because I don't think they can undo the Horford contract, and you got to pick somebody, and I guess Brett Brown could be the guy. Nice guy, no doubt about it. And I don't want to act like he's incompetent when it comes to the basketball stuff, but we all understand what it is with Philly's offense. It's awkward, the fit's not great, and they just kind of make it work. And even when they're successful, it still doesn't really look all that awesome, unless they're just red hot from three, in which case any team will be great under those conditions. An interesting thing, though, with Philly is that they're also not the best defensive team in the league, which I think they were banking on. I mean, they're currently 6th in defensive rating, and they're only a few decimal points from being closer to about number 10. For this whole thing to work, they had to be number 1. I mean, the Bucks have almost a 3-point defensive rating difference between them and everybody else, and I think Philly was hoping for that sort of thing. And how much of that do we blame on Brett Brown? Don't really know. I mean, if Brett Brown was gone, then what kind of coach would take over this 76ers team? I think it's a very interesting thing. Do you get somebody who is a little bit more intense? I mean, Steve Clifford could end up getting the boot this season, and I'll talk about him in a second on the Magic. Could Clifford be the type of guy the Sixers team needs? Or hell, even Tom Thibodeau? I mean, you're talking about banking on defense, and you've already got the personnel. With him, you'd probably be the best defense ever. But even then, it's like, well, how good of a coach really is Tibbs because of his minutes, and how creative is he when it comes to offense, and does he even understand the concept of 4 shooters around one big guy, or 3 shooters around Ben and Joel? That's the best you're going to get on this team? I don't know. So that'll be very interesting. But Brett Brown, yeah. Nate McMillan, potentially, but I'm more so not a fan of Nate McMillan than anything else, and Pacer fans as well, if you do a bit of Googling. But I could picture the front office being okay with McMillan and him sticking around. And also Jim Boylan. I don't want to talk about Boylan for too long because it's pretty well known. Like, between being a drill sergeant and his X's and O's suck, and he's pushing Lauri Markkanen away from the ball and whatever else, team doesn't like him. Yeah, we would all love for them to get rid of Boylan, but I don't think they're going to, so I'll just kind of move on. I do want to get to Steve Clifford now. So, Orlando remains in this weird mix of kind of good, but they haven't really made a big jump. But even so, I think Clifford's a good coach because they're good when it comes to rebounding and not fouling and not turning the ball over. I mean, regardless of your opinion on Steve Clifford as a coach, no matter where he's been, he's always instilled teams not beating themselves, and that's valuable. As far as can he get Aaron Gordon to play the right way and stuff like that, it's a different conversation. Of course, it doesn't help that Jonathan Isaac got hurt this year, and, well, I think Isaac was their best player, regardless of how many points he was actually scoring. The last one that I want to talk about in the East is Lloyd Pierce on the Hawks, because I think Atlanta is now at this point where, after making the Capella trade, they've got to decide, do they want to kind of go for it next season? Not in the sense of trading all of their assets, but in the sense of, look, it's year 3 for Trae Young. Let's get a real coach in here and let's see how many games we can win while still developing Cam and Herter and DeAndre Hunter and all these guys. Or are they just going to be like, nah, we'll just keep Lloyd Pierce and let's just see if he can grow with the team. I mean, you know, the prime candidate would be out there in Kenny Atkinson. He took over a similar, not even that similar, honestly, situation with the Nets, because the Nets were pretty depleted of talent. I mean, this team's got one of the best offensive players in the league, and Collins is still pretty damn good himself, so we'll have to see what they want to do. If we move on to the West, I think the most interesting ones are Mike Malone and then Mike D'Antoni. There are others that I'm going to at least speculate on, but those are the 2 that I'm watching the most. We start with Mike Malone. The Michael Porter Jr. thing has been a conversation all season. I've talked about it a few times. If you dive into the Nuggets Twitter or Nuggets Reddit, a lot of people have been back and forth about the MPJ thing, and I would have to imagine it's a conversation within the front office as well, although there is a chance the front office is more in partnership with Mike Malone on this sort of thing. I mean, there are definitely times in which we've seen coaches and front offices go to blows over young stars' minutes. The most recent example was Marvin Bagley. And so it'll be interesting to see how the Michael Porter Jr. thing develops. Like, maybe the front office is totally fine with the amount of minutes that he's been getting this season. But is there a chance that they're going to get impatient? Now, even moving past that, when we just look at Mike Malone, the coach in general, I don't think he's like an X's and O's whiz. I don't think he's a defensive mastermind. I think he's solid, not great, not horrible. And there's definitely improvements like that somewhere, whether it's an assistant in the league or a college coach or whatever. We'll have to see if the Nuggets offices are just content with Malone or if they think there can be an upgrade. And it'll also be interesting to see just how patient or impatient they are with this team really becoming a title contender, unless you believe they already are one. If we move on to Mike D'Antoni with the Rockets, I mean, if there's a disappointing playoff loss, and you got D'Antoni as well as Daryl Morey on one-year contracts, and part of me kind of feels like those two they like kind of go together at this point, this Rockets team, even though you could easily just let one go and keep the other. But part of me just feels like if the Rockets were going to get one of those guys out of there, they'd probably do it to both and just have a clean reset. The only thing there, though, is how many options do the Rockets really have to make some drastic change? I mean, I guess if you went from D'Antoni to another coach, you'd get a center who you intended to play a lot, but even then, who's that guy? Where is he coming from? I don't really know. It's almost like if you intend on keeping the super small ball past this season, wouldn't you just hang on to Mike D'Antoni? Because who's going to coach that better than him? I mean, I guess there's a couple of guys, but who's really available for that? So there's all that. But again, I think it depends on the playoffs, which will hopefully still happen. I mean, if the Rockets lose in round one to the Nuggets, then, well, okay. I mean, that series right there could impact, Malone and D'Antoni. If Houston goes all the way to the conference finals and loses it in a close one, then perhaps you keep D'Antoni around. So those are the main two in the West, but there's at least a couple I want to talk about for a little bit. Terry Stotts on the Blazers. They want this team to desperately get better, but they don't foresee making any big moves, so Stotts would be the guy out. I think Stotts is one of the better coaches in the league. I mean, could you argue that he's kind of hit his ceiling as a coach? I don't know. I mean, this season was lost pretty early on, if you ask me, with all the injuries. Portland has one of the more safe front offices going, and perhaps that's a sign that they're just going to keep everything steady and just hold on to Stotts, and I don't think that'd be a horrible move. The Wolves getting D'Lo and Beasley's been better. Are they going to hold on to Ryan Saunders? I mean, from a sentimental standpoint, I can understand why they want to keep him, and he's a young guy, and young coaches are usually a little more okay with getting weird and putting more shooting out there and stuff like that. I mean, he did that pretty quickly after they moved on from Tibbs. At least it feels like he did. He just had Towns out there with shooters, or as best as he could do with the roster he had. So maybe you'd want to hold on to him and give him a real shot with this Wolves team next season. Luke Walton with the Kings. I got to assume Luke is still going to be there. I mean, we can question whether Luke is good or not, but the Fox and the Bagley injuries and the fact that the Kings have still been kind of competitive this season, even if the win-loss record doesn't look good. They've had a lot of really close losses this year. I could picture Luke staying around. And I think that's it. Are those all the coaches I really wanted to talk about? I think so. I guess the last one could be the Grizzlies. I mean, I feel like they just kind of want to hold on to the momentum they have, and they want to give Taylor Jenkins more time. I mean, that team has overachieved, no doubt about it. And I mean, we can say it's because Ja is awesome, and that's true, and Jaren and Dylan and my guy Brandon Clark, but we got to give the coach some credit for all that as well, so I think he'll be probably around for the Grizzlies.